Please read this book. It is engaging, informative, and gives us hope for a kinder future. Wouldn't you want to read a book like that? Especially if you knew that that message came from Dr. Jane Goodall prior to her death. And we're going to be talking today about that very book. You know, you couldn't start off anything better than with a message from Dr. Goodall. Hi, everybody. I'm Victoria Moran, and this is the Main Street Vegan Podcast, but you know that because you're here. And if you happen to be watching on YouTube at Victoria Moran Official, rather than on one of the audio platforms that have so kindly hosted us for so long, then you actually see my wonderful guest for today, as well as having that stunning pre-intro about him, because good heavens, any friend of Dr. Jane Goodall has to be a friend of mine. But guess what? Our guest today, is also a friend of mine. I have known Bruce Friedrich since he was a college student, and what he has done since then absolutely blows me away. Bruce Friedrich is founder and president of the Good Food Institute, a global network of nonprofit, science-focused think tanks that is one of the top 5 nonprofits for climate change mitigation, according to climate charity evaluator Giving Green. Bruce's book, Meat, which we're going to be talking about today, the one that Dr. Goodall told us all to read, has earned endorsements also from Dr. Michael Greger, from Harvard Medical School genetics professor George Church, and the Ministry of the Future author Kim Stanley Robinson. Welcome, Bruce Friedrich.
Victoria, it's such a pleasure to be here. Thank you for having me.
Oh, it's always such a pleasure to see you, because I find that the longer I live, the more precious my longtime friends become to me. And what also happens with longtime friends is you see them grow. You see them grow alongside of you, or with people that are younger, like you're younger than me. And I got to see you go from college student when I was a young single mom. I mean, we were all back there doing our earlier life stuff, and to just look at what has happened. Now, if we look at how far we have to go, it's like, oh, good heavens. But when we look at what you have done, just you, not to mention all of our wonderful colleagues in this movement, things really are moving forward. So thank you. So you wrote a book and it's called Meat. What a brave title. Meat, it does have a subtitle, How the Next Agricultural Revolution Will Transform Humanity's Favorite Food and Our Future. What's it about?
Well, it is about the idea that the world has been, or animal activists, health advocates, and environmentalists have been begging the world to eat less meat for at least 55 years. And every single year since the UN Food and Agriculture Organization started tracking in 1961, meat consumption has gone up. So there have been 3 blips in land animal meat consumption. They were outweighed by the uptick in sea animal meat consumption. So mad cow disease, African swine fever, and COVID caused very small blips in the massive upward trajectory. But even after those blips, it's as though they didn't exist. The meat trajectory just keeps going up. Anybody who's tuning into Main Street Vegan knows that that's a problem. Meat comes with all kinds of external costs to the environment, to global health, to personal health, to animal protection, to animal welfare. Um, and so we should take a page from what is working for renewable energy and personal transport. So the theory of solar and electric, I'm sorry, the theory of solar, of wind energy, of other renewable energies is in addition to encouraging small is beautiful, in addition to encouraging people to walk more lightly on the earth, let's also shift off of fossil fuels and onto renewables. So that's basically the hypothesis of the book. We can make meat from plants that is indistinguishable from animal meat, but without all of the external costs and at a lower price. We can also cultivate actual animal meat in factories by taking, just like you can take a seed or a cutting from a plant and grow a whole plant, take a small amount of animal muscle or animal fat and grow unlimited additional animal muscle or animal fat without the animal slaughter, without the climate change emissions, without the land use needs and antimicrobial drugs and kind of all of that. So that's basically what the book's about.
So if we were talking 6 years ago or so, I think that it would be, well, of course, and rah rah, and everybody knows that, and it's already started, and isn't that grand? And now it seems as if you got a lot of backlash going. I mean, everywhere you look, somebody is talking about, and we'll get into both of these kinds of meat, but let's just talk about the plant-based meats right now, which seem innocuous. They're just plants doing something different, just like the first time somebody made, who knew a blended soup doesn't look like a sweet potato, but it is. And yet, there's just so much out there of those are processed foods, those are bad for you. Where did we go wrong, or did we?
I don't know if we went wrong exactly. I mean, there are ways, and in the book, I have a chapter that sort of plots the trajectory of plant-based meat, and I do point toward some ways that we went wrong. They mostly have to do with Impossible and Beyond come along. Pat Brown and Ethan Brown, the founders and CEOs of those two companies, no relation. Um, and they were talking about the need to basically hire tissue engineers and chemical engineers and other legit scientists and spend a lot of money on R&D. The basic hypothesis was meat is made up of fats, proteins, minerals, and water. That's all meat is. Plants also have fats, proteins, minerals, and water. So, with science, we should be able to create something that is indistinguishable. And because it requires so much less land, so much less water, so many fewer inputs, fewer stages of production at scale, we should be able to produce it at a lower price. And then you end up with a product that doesn't have all the external costs, that is identical from the vantage of the consumer, that is healthier, et cetera. Most of the sort of copycat companies that came along afterwards didn't really have any research budgets. They didn't hire scientists. They didn't have a chief science officer. So when you think about a company like Impossible Foods, Pat Brown, tenured professor of chemistry, chemical engineering at Stanford, medical doctor, one of the most impressive scientists on the planet. And it took him about 5 or 6 years and tens of millions of dollars to produce the Impossible Burger. And it wasn't nearly as good as the Impossible Burger is today. Then you have all of these companies that say they're going to be the next Impossible, but they're going to have products in 6 months. They're not going to spend any money on R&D. So they were basically sort of all the next Boca Burger or the next Garden Burger rather than the next Impossible Burger. So I think a lot of the sort of early expectations around creating a competitive ecosystem kind of went up in smoke in the early days. So that's one of the things that I point toward as our having done wrong. All of the consumer polling still, when you're asking somebody, would you switch if plant-based meat competed on price and taste? And the lowest numbers are still something like 25%, which is 25 times, 2,500% of current penetration, 25 times. So if we could get to that, that would do an awful lot of good. And the number one and two reasons that people are not yet eating plant-based meat are that they don't think the products are good enough and the products cost too much. And that's backed up by the data. Very few of the products are good enough, and all of the products cost way too much. The most taste competitive burgers cost twice as much. The most taste competitive things like hot dogs and chicken nuggets cost 3 to 5 times as much. So they really do need to come down in cost in order to compete. And And then I think once they approach price and taste parity, the health benefits will become a lot more clear because they all have less fat, less saturated fat, fewer calories, more fiber, no cholesterol, and they actually all also have more protein than the meat that they are replacing. But I think for the most part, people are not going to switch regardless of the ultra processing issue until the products compete on price and taste.
What about people who really believe that meat is a natural product and anything pretending to be it, however we come to it, is not?
I mean, most of those people, if you talk with them about what cultivated meat is, will grant you that cultivated meat is meat. Like it's just literally it's the exact same thing, just produced differently. And then you can have a conversation about the way that meat is produced today. I do think if somebody is a hunter, or if somebody is legitimately eating exclusively heritage breed animals, grass-fed beef, I mean, that's less than 1/10 of 1% of meat production is heritage breed animals or grass-fed beef. But for people who are doing that, I think that's a reasonable argument. It costs somewhere on the order of 4 to 6 times as much as conventional meat. But for people who are eating the products of industrial animal farms, I think once they start looking at the 100 different veterinary drugs that USDA and FDA consider it to be acceptable to have as residues in meat, or looking at industrial animal farms, industrial animal slaughterhouses, there's not much that's natural about the way that 99% of meat makes it to our plate. And I think most people become pretty uncomfortable, both with the level of cruelty involved, but also all of the drugs and other aspects that make it, kind of shockingly unnatural.
I know that the term in denial is overused, but I find that when I talk to omnivores, they all eat humane, natural, grass-fed, free-range animal products across the board, even though that's only 1 to 2% of what's available, and I must know 1 or 2% of everybody, not
Oh, it's
probably.
Yeah, I mean, it's way less than 1 to 2% of what's available if you take those terms seriously. Like cage free is, I think, clearly better than cages, but it's nowhere near something that anybody would consider to be humane or natural. It doesn't mean drug free. It doesn't mean ever scratches in the soil or breathes fresh air or ever even meets their young. There are certainly these labels, humane farm animal care and animal welfare approved and this sort of thing. And most of them are a little bit better. Most of them do involve, at the very least, the animals are not in cages and crates, which is definitely better. But gosh, I think if you visited the farms, the vast majority of people, if they visited the farms, and certainly if they looked at the way the animals are transported to slaughter, we're suffering a heat wave at the moment on the East Coast. The Midwest is also suffering the heat wave. Animals are being, chickens and turkeys and pigs and cattle, they're being loaded onto trucks. They don't have air conditioning. They're not getting water breaks shipped through, whatever. No matter how bitter the winter, no matter how hot the summer, the animals are transported to slaughter. The slaughterhouse conditions are really quite remarkably inhumane and unnatural. And that's true for the vast majority, even of the animal products that have labels. So it's not exclusively true. There are things like, polyface farms. I know a lot of people think that is inhumane as well, but it's certainly night and day better than industrial animal farms, and even most of the farms that have welfare labels. It's better than. And one of the things that makes it so much better is they do actually slaughter the animals on the farm. And anybody can go to YouTube right now, punch in anybody can go to YouTube right now, punch in Polyface Farms Joel Salatin and like watch them slaughtering animals. That is literally as good as it gets, and I think most people watching that would not want to do it personally, and I think should really think about how excited they are to support that kind of treatment.
So I know that you are a committed vegan, and I've known this for a long time because I think I spoke to you the week you made that change a long, long ago. So why is it that you feel at this point in your life, and you have for many years, that the way to go with getting a more humane and a more sustainable world is to give people the kind of meat they're going to want to eat instead of trying to create a world where people want to be vegan because they want to be vegan?
Well, I think both are important. And I think there are borderline limitless vegan cookbooks. There are a lot of people like you with your wonderful podcast and books about veganism. And there are other people doing that. There are vegetarian and vegan societies. There are vegetarian and vegan conferences. I'm not suggesting that any of that should go away. But I do think it's worth looking at the fact that, as I mentioned earlier, meat consumption just keeps going up. I mean, even in the US, the five highest years for per capita meat consumption are the most recent five. And globally, that's also true. Every single year, it's a new global record, both for per capita meat consumption and total meat consumption. And every prediction from agricultural economists is that as long as global GDP keeps going up, per capita meat consumption is going to go up. And we're not going to hit peak population probably until 2055, 2060, which means the amount of meat is going to go up even more than the per capita numbers would indicate. So, and that's, it's very similar to the idea that the world is going to consume more energy. And up until 15 years ago, people assumed that meant the world is going to consume more fossil fuels. And now, just in the last couple of years, we've really seen solar and wind and EV numbers shooting up the S curve in a way that even the experts predicted was not going to be possible just 10, 12 years ago. So I think something like that to address meat is just, it's got to be a tool in our toolkit. Because really, looking at meat trajectory going up, there are only two things that anybody's looking at to try to change that trajectory. One of them is convince people to eat less meat, which I think is valuable. And a lot of people are doing it, and it has had a positive effect. But what it hasn't done is changed the massive upward meat consumption trajectory. I don't think it's a good enough global strategy that it is suddenly going to work. And so then what are we left with? The only other thing that anybody's looking at is, can we replicate the precise meat, dairy, and egg experience, but without animal farms? And I think absolutely. And the plant-based meats are healthier. The cultivated meats are, they're the same core nutritional components. But if it's fish, if it's seafood, it doesn't have the mercury, doesn't have the dioxins, doesn't have the microplastics. If it's land animal meat, it doesn't have any of the drug residues. It doesn't have the bacterial contamination. So it's a safer, healthier product, but literally identical in the case of cultivated meat. In the case of plant-based meat, it's a healthier product, even more protein. Not animal meat. And I do think there are a lot of people, the sort of Joe Rogans and RFKs, who really just want animal meat. But cultivated meat gives them that, but without any of the contaminants and other things that make meat really unsafe.
But also without the American culture and the American character, I believe they would argue. I was watching an old movie, it was about the hockey team, and I believe it was 1980 when the US surprised the world and beat the Russians. And there was a parade to introduced the Winter Olympics there in the city where it was taking place. And the Russians had their big fur hats that you would suspect they would have. And the Americans were all in cowboy attire and cowboy hats. And I realized, that was 50 years ago. I think they'd still be in cowboy hats because that seems to be the way we see ourselves. So, as we're working towards changing minds and changing habits and changing what's available in the marketplace, what do we do about the culture? We have this meaty culture. How do we change it?
Yeah, I mean, I guess there are a couple of things to say about that. And one of them is that is true for cattle and ranching. I don't think it's true for chicken or pork really at
Hmm,
all.
okay.
from an animal protection standpoint, if people were to shift from, eating chickens and pigs to eating, cattle and cultivated meat, that'd be a pretty big win. But I mean, the polling on this is exceptionally good. So the worst numbers that you see for people who are asked if cultivated meat tasted identical and cost the same, would you switch over a significant portion of your consumption? The worst numbers are still well north of 20%. And that's if you call it in vitro meat and talk about test tubes and have some disgusting photo. Um, so I think there will be a lot of early adopters for cultivated meat who are willing to pay more, which is going to be necessary early. And then I think the safety benefits and the other benefits, a lot of people will switch. I mean, even now, the numbers are north of 20%. And one of the cool things is the more meat people eat, the more enthusiastic they are about cultivated meat, not plant-based meat, but cultivated meat. A lot of people are also enthusiastic about plant-based meat. I do think people are eating meat for the most part now, despite how it's produced, not because of how it's produced. Um, so yes, I think there will be some people who are enthusiastic about ranching. Very few people who are enthusiastic about animal slaughter. Even ranchers tend not to be enthusiastic about animal slaughter. And I think the benefits of these products, as they come down in price, as they become more familiar to people, you can have the sort of homestead, Western expansion, kind of a lot of the things that come with cowboy culture, without actually slaughtering animals. But even if there is some of that, um, a lot less of it globally, which is where the vast majority of animals are slaughtered. And if we can make, I mean, again, if we could just, there are going to be 50 billion more land animals slaughtered in 2050 relative to now, according to current projections. If we just stopped the 50 billion additional land animals, that would be remarkably positive. But I mean, the U.S. has kind of the U.S. numbers are good for plant-based meat and cultivated meat. They're lower than a lot of places in the rest of the world that don't have the sort of cattle culture.
Well, good for the rest of the world. So help us understand cultured meat, and particularly addressing an audience that's largely vegetarian and vegan. I've gotten a lot of pushback whenever I've said something good about cultivated meat. I'm not an expert at all, so my answers have not been good, but you're an expert a lot. So, can you answer some of the objections that animal people have about this product that could conceivably save 50 million animals?
50 billion animals.
Oh,
So I
billion.
mean, yeah, I mean, there right now there are 80 billion land animals slaughtered every single year. There are even more sea animals slaughtered every single year. Over the most recent 25-year period, meat consumption has gone up by about 65%. So if that happens again over the next 25 years, we're going to be looking at going from 80 billion to 130 billion land animals in 2050. And I guess I don't care. I mean, not only do I not care if people who are currently Whole Foods plant-based diet eaters, like I'm not expecting any of them to switch in this direction. Um, but I do find it remarkable when people are actually opposed. And I really kind of can't wrap my mind around it. As somebody who, as you know, has been, I'll be 39 years vegan in November. It was reading your work about protein complementing that caused me to realize that I could stop eating the low-fat cottage cheese that I was eating. Because coming from Oklahoma and going to college in Iowa, like, what, I'm going to waste away to nothing as a vegan. So I was reading your stuff in Animals Agenda and I think Vegetarian Times in both, and learning that I didn't actually have to do that. Um, so I've been, vegan for almost 40 years. You've obviously been vegan for even longer. And in that time, meat production and consumption has just skyrocketed. So I don't know. I'm enthusiastic about people who are vegetarian and vegan continuing to encourage other people to do that. I'm enthusiastic about books that encourage diet change and lifestyle change and everything else. But I do think if that's the only tool in our toolkit, and I haven't heard somebody come up with some other way we're going to do something about the massive uptick in meat consumption. The idea of disparaging something that has, I think, an excellent shot of working, I find really surprising.
Well, one of the arguments, I'm glad you said excellent shot at working because that's one of the ones that people have asked me about. And they claim that everything looks as if it could never be financially possible, realistically possible, that the numbers would never add up. It could never have the kind of reach that it would need to really make a difference. How do you answer that one?
Well, I mean, it's a reasonable thing for people to be concerned about, and it's half of the reason that I wrote the book. So, for people who want a thorough dive into that as a concern, it is a big part of what I'm concentrated on in the book. And I actually started writing the book by reaching out to 25 plant-based meat scientists and engineers, 25 cultivated meat scientists and engineers. And I just started with the question, can we, using cell cultivation, can we, using plant sciences and engineering, get to price and taste competitive, the cheapest meat possible? So things like fish sticks and chicken nuggets, can we do it? And if the answer is yes, what is it going to require to get there? And I met with universal enthusiasm for the can we do it? Everybody thinks, yes, we can. Multiple people pointed out that 5 or 6 years ago on the cultivated meat side, we really didn't know. There were still some question marks around things like cell cultivated media. There were still some question marks around cultivator design. I think there are still some question marks. Like if it turned out that the science and engineering wouldn't work, it would be because of cultivator design. Something about it just doesn't work. But there is universal optimism. And you look at a company like Mosa Meat, they brought costs down by a factor of 100,000 in 12 years without that much investment. I think the company's raised about 130, $140 million. Um, so you think about in all of time, cultivated meat, the world has put about $3.4 billion into it. That's spread across 150 companies in the 12 years that anybody's been working on the endeavor. $3.4 billion is less than the cost of one EV battery factory. If you've got a $50 billion biopharma conglomerate, it's going to cost you more than $3.4 billion to bring two drugs to market. So it's just a vanishingly small amount of money, relatively speaking. And all of chapter 8 of the book is about the nature of innovation and the tendency of people to say, this cannot be done, this cannot be done, this cannot be done, this cannot be done, until the thing that they think can't be done is ubiquitous. So one of the examples is the automobile. At the turn of the 20th century, in the first 10 years, 1900 to 1910, more than 500 car companies went out of business, including Henry Ford's first car company. Woodrow Wilson was president of Princeton University in 1906, which was the year he said that the automobile will never be more than a plaything for the idle rich. And the reason he said that is that the cars were really hard to start. They were breaking down constantly, and they were really expensive. And he just couldn't conceive of a world in which those three things were not true. And yet Henry Ford introduced the Model T in 1908. He solved the first two. He made them easier to start. He made them not break down so much. And he started the trajectory of bringing costs down so that the auto industry was America's largest industry just 20 years later. At the turn of the 21st century, we had something very similar happen with internet commerce. So the dot-com bubble burst. The NASDAQ lost, I think, like 60% of its value. Amazon lost more than 97% of its value, went from 215 to less than $6 a share. Pets.com became a conventional wisdom laughing stock. Who would ever want to buy pet supplies online? Har har. And the thing to realize is that only 6% of people had landlines at the time. And the internet commerce companies just weren't very good yet at selling stuff online. So now, Chewy has a valuation that's more than 30 times what Pets.com's maximum valuation was. It got up to, I think, $400 million. Chewy's at like $13 billion valuation. And there's similar stories to be told about everything from airplanes to artificial intelligence to home computers to, the light bulb. Um, so the main challenge that I have for people is like, what do you think the physics constraint is? What's the science or engineering constraint that says we can't use science to make meat from plants that's indistinguishable? What is the science or engineering constraint that says cultivated meat at price and taste parity is impossible? And I have an awful lot in the book that says seems to be absolutely possible. Might still not happen, but my hypothesis in the book is that if it doesn't happen, it's because we didn't bring the will, not because the science doesn't work.
I think people are confused a little bit because a couple of years ago we were told there was a restaurant in Singapore that offered cultivated meat. Well, if they had it, why could nobody else have it? I think it's just maybe it is a little bit like AI. It's a concept that's so new to people that we try to speak intelligently about it and we don't know what we're talking about.
And I think that's true of basically every technology since forever. So there's a prototype of kind of everything. And I think it's the reason, people like Steve Jobs, he didn't do consumer research to figure out the iPhone. Henry Ford didn't do consumer research to figure out the automobile. So, I mean, chapter 8 of the book just really dives into a bunch of examples of, yes, everything has to start somewhere. The early iterations of every technology are a lot more expensive than the thing is going to cost once you get the science and the engineering and the manufacture right. And things improve over time. So that is, I think, extremely likely to happen here. And some of the stuff I talk about in the book for reasons for optimism 6 years ago, right now, there was no public funding at all for open access science and plant-based meat or cultivated meat. And there hadn't been any in either of those categories since 2005. Now we have more than 30 countries funding hundreds of millions of dollars in public financing for open access research. By the end of 2020, there had been 24 peer-reviewed science articles on cultivated meat in all of human history. In 2024, there were 150 in that year alone, and they just keep going up. It tracks the public funding, right? The government is putting money into this, and consequently, funding is going up. So scientific interest is going up. 10 years ago, right now, there had been one cultivated meat conference in all of time and no plant-based meat conferences. Now there are all over the world, there are dozens every month. So scientific interest continues to go up, government interest continues to go up, and scientific progress. Anybody just punch in have a Google alert for cultivated meat and plant-based meat. You'll get a lot more back on cultivated meat, and I talk about why that's true in the book as well. But yeah, I mean, progress is really impressive. We have a long way to go, but I think there's a lot of cause for optimism.
That's cool. And I just think people who have been vegan as long as you and we've seen what's happened with the plant-based meats. I mean, I remember when people went to health food shops and you'd pick up your can of plant-based meat and there would be a circle in the dust because nobody had picked it up for a really long time and it didn't taste all that great either. So, yeah, we can see some evolution. I know we're here to talk about meat, but I am always so inspired to hear you talk about what the automobile did for horses. So, can you just give us a couple of sentences on that?
Yeah, I mean in the late 18 up into the 1890s and the early 1900s, hundreds of thousands of horses, astronomical amounts of horse manure, flies, disease, filth, and really nobody had any idea how they were going to solve this problem. The ASPCA, the American Society for the Prevention of Cruelty to Animals, was literally founded to try to do something about people beating horses in the streets to try to get them to move. People would just abandon their horses if they got sick, and the horses would dehydrate to death like there on the side of the road. Um, and there wasn't any kind of urban planning solution that anybody could come up with that might work. It's kind of like for those of us who are concerned about the environmental and global health impacts of meat consumption, and we just watch meat consumption go up and up and up. And the only thing we've been able to think of until recently was let's try to convince people to eat less meat. And it has not been working. It works to some degree. It works at a micro scale. There'd be even more people eating meat and even more meat if not for our efforts. But globally, meat consumption just keeps going up. The people who are trying to convince people to be kinder to horses, people who are trying to convince people not to use horses, neither of those things was working very well. And then Henry Ford comes along, introduces the Model T, and in the course of like 15 years, horses are relegated to tourist attractions. It's really quite remarkable. And there's a similar story to be told about whale slaughter and the light bulb basically making whale blubber no longer a lucrative way of, um, lighting and heating, and similar examples having to do with pens and plucking geese and various other examples that are similar.
I love it. I love it. Now, I want to go back specifically to your fabulous book, Meat. Now, that's going to be an easy one to buy, right? In the subtitle, you talk about meat as humanity's favorite food. And there was a time that I would have argued about that. I would have said, oh no, we like sugar a lot more. But we don't, because you can stop eating sugar and people will say, oh, but you stop eating meat and people want to know if you've changed your religion, if you're going to divorce your spouse, and all of that. So, how did it get to be humanity's favorite food?
Yeah, I mean, I speculate on that. So, chapter 5 is basically the chapter where I say for dubious vegans and vegetarians that what we're trying to do is noble and great, but it's not up to the challenge of meat's inexorable rise. And I talk about why that is true. And the main thing that I come up with is Daniel Kahneman, the Nobel laureate in economics, who wrote the just brilliant book, Thinking Fast and Slow. And he suggests that human thinking, there's systems one thinking and systems two thinking. Systems one thinking kind of tracks to Maslow's hierarchy of needs, the bottom of the pyramid, the physiological needs. And that's where food is. Um, Whereas higher levels are systems two, and that's where rationality and ethics are. And I think that helps to explain kind of odd anomalies. Like in California, the sales of cage-free eggs and cage-free pork was basically non-existent in 2008. And yet, by the highest percentage and the highest number of votes in California ballot initiative history, they banned cages for laying hens and crates for veal calves and gestating pigs. And half of the major newspapers in the country in the state came out against it. The San Francisco Chronicle came out against the ballot measure. Multiple other papers, half of the papers roughly, and they didn't come out against them. They didn't try to make a "this is not a hideous abuse of animals" argument. They made a straight "this is going to cause the price of pork and eggs to go up" argument. And nevertheless, 70 plus percent of Californians said no. These products that are 98, 99% of what we're buying, we shouldn't be able to buy them. And I think that's because they legitimately felt that way. Systems two, ethics, they don't think the cruelty is okay, but they go to the grocery store and it's, is this delicious? Is it affordable? How do I feed my family? And it's very much physiological systems one thinking. There are a whole bunch of similar examples. There's an amazing study done in a cafeteria where they labeled green beans, and if they labeled them heart healthy or they labeled them low fat, low calorie, like basically nobody picked them up. But if they labeled them, delicious or put some, label on them that made your mouth water, that's what caused people to buy them. And for a little while, when I was giving college lectures, I would ask people which of these labels would cause you to buy this product. And most people just said I'm impervious to labels. I'm just going to buy it if I want the green beans. I'm not going to buy it if I don't want the green beans. But to the degree that people thought the labels were going to be meaningful, they thought the labels that said things like heart healthy, low fat, low calorie were the things that would cause them to buy the products. But the study's been replicated, and it's just not true. People go for the thing that makes them think they are going to be sated. I think it's the same reason that if you label something vegan or vegetarian, the exact same thing, people are less likely to buy it, which I think makes the idea of vegetarian sections of menus, things that you and I might really appreciate for the convenience, actually end up being counterproductive to the things that cause us to be vegetarian and vegan, to making an impact. And the hypothesis is that if people see vegan or vegetarian, I mean, half the hypothesis is they think I'm not vegan or vegetarian, so that's not for me. But they also think it's not going to taste as good or it's going to be lower calorie or whatever. So even if they might be sympathetic to it when they're not sitting in a restaurant about to order off a menu, sitting in a restaurant ordering off a menu, their systems one thinking kicks in, and they go for the thing that they think is going to be, more delicious, and that generally tracks with higher calorie, higher fat, higher salt, the things that make foods appealing. And not sure how well I just did with that, but Kahneman really, Thinking Fast and Slow, cannot recommend that as a book highly enough for helping to sort of like understand human psychology. And he doesn't specifically address this question, but I think it's pretty easy to look at this question through the lens of the stuff he does talk about.
I think too, the fact that it's been given a starring role culturally. Men work hard to put meat on the table. You get a job so you can bring home the bacon, beef, it's what's for dinner. Doesn't matter how delicious the other stuff is. This is the center. We somehow learn to relate to the key player.
I mean, it's pretty universal though. Like, I mean, maybe that's just maybe the meat industry is just really great at advertising everywhere. But even in India in the last 25 years, meat consumption is up 300%. So,
Mhm.
I mean, in the US, it's up 65%. In India, it's up, four and a half times that much. Still much lower than here, the base, but like, I don't know. I mean, the main Indian sort of, I mean, in India, the main political party, the BJP, the prime minister, like the messaging in the main newspapers, it's kind of constantly vegetarian, 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 for spiritual reasons. And yet meat consumption's up 300%. There does seem to be something um, about meat that tracks with the idea of like affluence. And that seems to be fairly universal. It could be a meat industry just penetrating the world, but I'd be a little surprised if that's true.
Now, I think it's been that way for a long time. I want to talk about Bruce. I know we need to wind down here in a bit, but I'm fascinated with how you chose to start this book. So I'd like to look at your first three chapters. The second chapter about the rainforests, about the environment, that's something that we talk about now and we look at. But you have brought up in these other three chapters things that aren't talked about much at all, as far as I can tell. Feeding the hungry, that was huge back 40 years ago. Now it's just hardly ever mentioned, but you mention it first. And then you talk about saving modern medicine, the antibiotic resistance, really important, and the zoonotic diseases and preventing the next pandemic. So I know we're all going to read meat. We're going to order it. We're going to get it for our friends, and we're going to read all these chapters for ourselves. But can you give us a little preview about feeding the hungry and saving modern medicine and preventing the next pandemic?
Yeah, I mean the thing that turned me vegan, 39 years ago this November, was the basic resource argument, and the fact that the current number is if you want to eat chicken, it takes 9 calories into a chicken to get 1 calorie back out, and chickens are the most efficient animals at turning crops into meat. Um, and what that does is it drives up the price of land. It drives up the price of cereals. And if you look every year at the UN Food and Agriculture Organization Global Food Security Report, every year it has to do with the price of food. 3 billion people cannot afford a nutritious diet, according to their most recent report. And something like 750 million are in nutritional deficit. They're malnourished because they can't afford a healthy diet. Well, cycling all of these crops through animals drives up prices for land, drives up prices for crops, and quite literally leads to hunger, malnutrition, starvation. One of the endorsements of the book that I was most delighted to get is from Michael Kremer, the Nobel laureate in economics. And chapter 1 of the book, I lean a lot on some of his analysis that makes precisely this point. So the microeconomic case that shifting away from industrial animal meat and toward plant-based meat and cultivated meat can cause food prices and land prices to go down. And one of the things that's true about that as well is that even for like smallholder animal farmers, for pastoralists, the thing that is throwing them off the land, for subsistence fishing communities, the thing that's throwing them off the water is industrial animal agriculture. If we can shift in the direction of plant-based meat and cultivated meat, we can make it easier for those small animal farmers, less total meat, and also the poorest farmers, not going destitute and becoming malnourished. So that's chapter 1 of the book. As you said, chapter 2 of the book is about the environment. Predominantly, it's about climate, biodiversity, and deforestation. Chapter 3 of the book is about antimicrobial resistance, which the UK government says is a more certain threat to humanity than climate change. And the top 2 things that are contributing to antimicrobial resistance, which killed 1.3 million people last year and contributed to another almost 5 million deaths, it's going to be directly responsible for 10 million deaths per year by 2050. So that's as many as cancer. And the things that are causing antimicrobial resistance, one is overprescription in humans, and the other is the use of medically relevant antibiotics in farm animals, including farmed fish. And right now, about 70% of human antibiotics are used in veterinary medicine to keep farm animals alive in the squalid conditions, which would otherwise cause death losses to skyrocket. Farmers also learned that if you're feeding your animals antibiotics, they need less feed and they'll grow more quickly. And WHO has been screaming about this since at least 1999. There have been journal articles saying this is going to contribute to the end of working antibiotics since the 1950s, which is when antibiotics in farm animals were introduced. And it's really a health scourge. If people want to scare, Google the end of working antibiotics. If you really want to even bigger scale scare, add the word China to that Google search. And both of these things are getting worse. And this is one we can solve. Plant-based meat and cultivated meat require no antibiotics at all. And then, chapter 4 is about pandemic risk. In July of 2020, so kind of at the peak COVID, the International Livestock Research Institute released a report called Preventing the Next Pandemic. They pulled together 18 of the world's leading zoonotic disease specialists, about 60 peer reviewers, and their consensus list of the 7 most likely causes of the next pandemic. 6 of them are linked to industrial animal agriculture. The first one on their list is increased meat consumption, because more animals means more potential vectors for the next pandemic. And the second one is industrial animal agriculture, both because the animals are kept in such squalid conditions. It's basically disease breeding grounds, but also the animals are so genetically similar to one another now that they have very depressed immune systems, which means that if one of them gets sick, it's far more likely that lots and lots or even all of them are going to get sick. So, it's the external costs of meat production are not just cruelty to animals. It's also, hunger and malnutrition, range of environmental issues, antimicrobial resistance, pandemic risk. All of the key factors for each of these, human, scourges to humanity. All of the factors that contribute to them are getting worse year by year. Plant-based meat and cultivated meat could eliminate meat's contribution to antimicrobial resistance and pandemic risk, and slash its contribution to hunger, malnutrition, and the range of environmental issues.
Well, and I would call that doing God's work. So I want to ask you about another part of your life and personality. The last time you were on this program was a long time ago. It was when Pope Francis's encyclical on the environment and animals came out. And I remember you called it at that time almost an animal rights manifesto.
I don't think I said almost. I mean, he he like denounces anthropocentrism by name in that encyclical. He says animals are going to heaven. He says mistreating animals is a sin. Yeah, I mean, Ingrid Newkirk could have written the parts of that encyclical that have to do with animals. It's like legit animal rights. It's a remarkable
It
document.
it is and was and is remarkable, and now Pope Francis has gone on. So can you just give us your intake, your insights onto into where the Catholic Church is now on some of these things, and how you, as a Catholic person, include all that and how you see stuff?
Yeah, I mean, the Catechism says explicitly that causing animals to suffer needlessly is a denial of God's belief in the mutuality of creation. And for me, like, nobody needs to eat meat. So, just connect the dots. Eating meat is causing animals to suffer and die needlessly. So we shouldn't do it. Um, is my hypothesis. And I wrote about that for the LA Times and USA Today when Laudato Si on care for our creation and our common home came out. And I continue to believe that's true. I mean, I do think Catholicism, I think it calls us to stand up for the least of these, as Jesus puts it in Matthew 25. And I'm really taken with Andrew Lindsay, the Oxford theologian, professor of theology, Anglican priest, his analysis that says animals are God's creatures. They were designed by God to have a range of needs and desires and things that God designed them to be and to do. And the way they're treated on industrial farms and in industrial slaughterhouses, it denies all of that. And that's a moral issue. And I think that's an issue that people of faith should be taken seriously. I always like to caveat this with like, I don't think if you look at what Jesus said about salvation, it's exclusively Matthew 25. When people were hungry, did you give them food? When they were homeless, did you give them shelter? When they were sick and in prison, did you visit them? I don't have an evangelical bone in my body in terms of Christianity, but I think for me at least, Catholicism aligns with how I want to live my life and my Catholicism continues to be deeply meaningful and really the thing that guides the decisions that I make.
Meaning and guidance, I think we all could use individually and collectively, wherever we find that. So I have one more question for you, Bruce. One more, of course, recommendation for this incredible book, Meat: How the Next Agricultural Revolution Will Transform Humanity's Favorite Food and Our Future. And in the show notes at mainstreetvegan.com, I will give you all the ways to find Bruce Friedrich. Of course, you can find the book wherever books are sold. And Bruce's incredible organization, well, it's not his organization, but he's very much instrumental in the work of the Good Food Institute, gfi.org. And I also want to invite everyone to take a look over there at mainstreetvegan.com at the autumn cohort number 39 of Main Street Vegan Academy. We have had some of the most amazing instructors. Bruce Friedrich taught for us a few times in the past. We've had people who have been named here, Ingrid Newkirk. We've had Rabbi David Rosen. We have all kinds of physicians, dietitians, chefs, and people who can help you get out into the world to write, speak, teach, work with others, work in the food industry that's promoting some of these amazing alternatives, work in the animal rights organizations. Our graduates are doing all this and more. So do check out that program at mainstreetvegan.com. And because you listen to the podcast, and so that means you're my friend, here's a discount code. That would be Veg Coach, no caps, 250. Veg Coach 250, $250 off your tuition. You'll never regret it. So, Bruce, what can we do? What can we do as people who care, vegans, almost vegans, out there in the world where people aren't getting along on pretty much anything and opening up civil discourse around these kinds of issues?
Yeah, I mean, I will say that I do think there's something about personal diets that makes conversations harder for people. There's just it's so deeply personal. We at the Good Food Institute, we are aggressively bipartisan. We have a lot of Republican and Democratic allies. We've won a lot of battles because we have so many Republicans on board and supportive. We also, in a way that I think is surprising to a lot of people, have the meat industry on board. So the largest meat companies in the world, JBS, Tyson, Cargill, none of them exist to slaughter animals. They exist to produce meat. If they can produce meat even less expensively, and it's actual animal meat, cultivated meat, or it's plant-based meat, and consumers are enthusiastic about it, they're really happy to do that. They have a lot of headaches that come with the current incredibly fragile supply chain. Um, and then the other thing to say, I guess, is like all of chapter 9 of the book is about economics and how this can be really good for the countries that lean in. It can be good for their gross domestic product. Chapter 10 is about the importance of alternative proteins for food security. And both of those chapters lean quite a bit on a Center for Strategic and International Studies report, about 5,000 words, that says that the US government should prioritize these technologies alongside biopharma and advanced chips for AI. And my first choice for the foreword for the book was a woman named Caitlin Welsh. She was 5 years at the State Department under Barack Obama, almost all of the first Trump term at the National Security Council. She left to found CSIS's Global Food and Water Security Program. And, up until the sort of odd turn of the Republican Party writ large, CSIS was sort of a center-right think tank. And still is a center-right think tank, although not as MAGA aligned. But I do think having a conversation about technology, about innovation, about science, about different ways to make meat, can be a conversation that is significantly easier to have than a conversation that goes into personal dietary choices, which is why the opening line of the book is something like, I think it's, let me get one thing out of the way right now. I'm not here to tell anyone what to eat. Um, and then the conclusion of the book is basically it's basically a whole bunch of unsolicited courier advice. So it really is a sort of long answer to the question you just asked, what can people do? That recognizes that it really depends on what people are doing now, sort of how they can plug in. But a good starting place is the GFI website and signing up for our newsletters, and seeing where you might plug in. And then the book, the book does have a dedicated website, which is just meatbook.org, not particularly original. And the conclusion of the book is a bunch of ideas for how people can plug in.
Beautiful. Well, as Dr. Goodall said, please read this book and read it for yourself too, and read it for your kids and for the animals and the planet and the future. And Bruce, thank you so much. Thank you for being stalwart. Thank you for being magnificent. And thank you for plugging along.
We're
And
going on 40 years of friendship,
I know,
Victoria, 40
I
years.
know. Isn't that
Uh,
cool? We should have a party or something
yeah, we
in
should.
November. Sounds good. Thank you. Thanks for the
Thank you.
book and all you do and all you've done. And everybody else, thank you for listening. Let's just go out there and make Main Street vegan.